Welcome, everyone, everywhere, wherever you are. Today, we have the great pleasure of having Professor Bert Groen from Graz, and he's the professor of liturgy and popular culture. He has an interest also in popular culture, and that is an aspect of today's talk involving Kazantzakis, a name that will be familiar to all who love Greek films. He works also in the area of East-West Christian dialogue, and today he's going to speak on Nikos Kazantzakis and his attitude to theology and Christology. So over to you, Bert.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. And what a pleasure to see so many familiar faces. Please read them. Thank you for attending and being together here. So let's start off. Nikolaos Michail Nikos Kazantzakis was born in 1883 and departed in 1957. He was a Greek, a Cretan writer who became world famous for his fascinating novels and their film versions, such as Zorba the Greek, the bestseller of modern Greek literature, and a movie that many of us might have seen, then Christ Re-Crucified, also known under its title, The Greek Passion, about a village where a group of rich Greeks is shocked and annoyed by the arrival of a group of poor Greeks. And at the same time, passion play is going on, and the protagonists of the passion play identify more and more with their roles, with an expected, I might say, end. Then Captain Michalis, Freedom or Death, the Cretan battle for independence, for freedom. Then God's Little Poor Man, which is about Saint Francis of Assisi. And then The Last Temptation, probably also well known for many, in particular its film version, The Last Temptation of Christ. Kazantzakis also wrote a spiritual autobiography, Report to Greco, Report to El Greco, with whom he felt a great affinity. He wrote numerous annotations and letters, as well as essays and scholarly studies. With respect to the last two categories, of special note are his programmatic poetic essay, Asceticism, also known as Spiritual Exercises, The Saviors of God, Greek title Ascetiki, Salvatoris Dei, which is actually Latin, of course. Then a history of Russian literature, and a high number of contributions to dictionaries and school books. His monumental Odyssey bears mention as well. In 33,333 verses, the poet narrates the new adventures of Ulysses after his return to Ithaca. The new epic story tells the story of what has happened after the return of Ulysses to Ithaca. So it starts there where Homer stops. Then he additionally crafted a high number of literary translations. For instance, 7 of Plato's dialogues, Dante's La Divina Commedia, Goethe's Faust, Spanish and US American poetry, and also Homer's Iliad and Odyssey in modern Greek. His own literary production has in turn been translated into dozens of languages. And in comparison with other eminent representatives of modern Greek literature, Kazantzakis and the Greek poet Konstantinos Kavafis are the ones whose works have been rendered most. And this translation work still goes on today. As this talk takes place at a renowned English university, it might be interesting to note that Kazantzakis has visited England twice, both times at the invitation of the British Council. In a book called England, Anglia, he collected his memories, spiced with his fascinating judgments, inclusive of those with respect to his visits to the universities of Oxford and Cambridge. It was in Cambridge that he penned his novel, The Ascent, or Aniphoros, a novel that he did not want to be published, but was nonetheless launched 1 year ago in 2022. During his first visit to Albion, which took place from June to November 1939, he felt fairly at ease, enjoying what he called the liberal tradition and the aristocratic gentleman style of British society. Despite his ambivalent feelings, he liked, on the one hand, the green fields, the museums, the libraries, while he detested, on the other, that what he called the ugliness, the pollution of industrial cities. The goal of his second visit to Britain, which happened in 1946, was to attempt to unite writers, artists, and intellectuals from all over the world into a internationally of the spirit. However, his initiative, for which he also spoke at the BBC, hardly met with success. He experienced a general indifference for this ideal, and he was quite disappointed. It seems, moreover, that the British Foreign Office has expelled him this time as a persona non grata. It's supposed, we don't have really evidence, but we have strong suspicion. His supposed misbehavior apparently was that Kazantzakis had told the truth to a government official who had asked for his opinion about Greek politics. Kazantzakis had declared that the communists were extremely popular in Greece and would win the elections because they had organized the resistance against the German occupants. But the Foreign Office wanted to limit the substantial communist impact in Greece and disliked Kazantzakis' evaluation. It seems that he has been summoned to leave the country. And if this is true, the suspicion that he was a leftist and the fact that the Cold War was about to erupt are quite likely to have played a decisive role in the British decision to throw him out. A conspicuous hallmark of Kazantzakis' immense oeuvre is its religious and spiritual character. There are only a few writers in the highlights of world literature who so intently and consistently engage with the divine as the Cretan has done. His wrestling with the numinous and his search for his own form of sainthood went along with the process of distancing himself from institutionalized religion. Though raised in and saturated with the liturgical and spiritual tradition of the Orthodox Church, he soon dissociated himself from the ecclesiastical establishment of his youth. He rejected, for instance, the uniqueness of salvation in Jesus Christ as the only begotten Son of God, and he denied abiding life in the hereafter. Heaven and hell for him were not modes of existence after death, but positive and negative situations here on earth. He declined, in addition, belief in a personal God who exists outside human beings. In his opinion, the Godhead, as well as the devil and demons, subsist only within humans. In other words, the Cretan writer bade farewell to important traditional Christian doctrines and followed many other ways to save his own soul, God, and the world, as he said it. Nonetheless, and this is my point, the Greek Orthodox spiritual and liturgical tradition has influenced his work to a quite considerable extent. He held on to various Christian elements which appealed to him, although he filled them in with modified contents. Put it in a different way. His own world of thought was a kind of heretical orthodoxy, or terrestrial or liberal religion, which included a selection of orthodox constituents that he reframed and fitted into his own philosophy of life. In this context, it is important to note that he was not a systematic theologian, nor a professional philosopher, but a stellar writer, fascinated and driven by the search for inner worldly transcendence and the meaning of life. He was highly interested in all kinds of religions and the great variety of their tenets and rituals, but he wanted neither to be identified with nor to adhere to any of them. He called fixed verities into question and navigated his own path through the bewildering diversity of the global principles of life. In consequence, scholars like we may certainly survey and appraise the multifarious theological and philosophical aspects of his work, but these should not be measured and assessed either approvingly or disapprovingly with the gauge of specialists in the realms of divinity and philosophy. In Greece of the period, both the left and the right often reacted in quite negative ways to the Cretan writer. Many Orthodox clergy and common faithful decried him, discarding his religious character and persistent quest for God, and branding him as a blasphemer and an atheist. Nevertheless, besides several Orthodox bishops, in particular from Crete, the ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople, Athenagoras, highly esteemed Kazantzakis, and he refused to comply with the request of the Holy Synod in Athens to excommunicate him. Kazantzakis has never been excommunicated. There have been efforts to excommunicate him, but he has never formally been banished. It was in all likelihood inevitable that a chorus of traditional believers would indignantly respond to the free-thinking and liberal Cretan. On top of this, about 70 years ago, the headship of the Roman Catholic Church put Kazantzakis' The Last Temptation on the index of forbidden books. And a number of US American Protestant groups endeavored to remove his works from the public libraries. Today, however, a range of Orthodox bishops and theologians, both in Greece and outside Greece, can be found who advocate a positive reappraisal of his literary production and continuous quest for God. Just one example, the Metropolitan of Austria and Exarch of Hungary, Metropolitan Arsenios, thinks that Nikos Kazantzakis is a great theologian and that his works must be studied also from a theological point of view. Not systematically, I mean from the gauge of systematic theology, but Arsenios, who happens to be a Cretan, and I think that is not a coincidence, Arsenios is enthused about Kazantzakis, and I know a whole range of them. So, in spite of, and partly because of all smear campaigns against him, Kazantzakis was, and still is, an extremely popular writer. I would say in particular in Greece and in the Anglo-Saxon area, less in the Germanic-speaking area. If I go here into a bookstore, and I see at K, it is first Franz Kafka. He is all over the place, Franz Kafka. And then Jack Kerouac, and there is no Kazantzakis in between them. Kazantzakis' dealing with the divine is particularly manifest in his programmatic essay, Asceticism. saviors of God. He composed it this year, 100 years ago, on the basis of his theory. 2023 was 100 years ago, but that is not important. He composed it on the basis of his theory about the goal and destination of humanity and the world, about God's essence and activity, about the purpose of life in general, personal and universal freedom, and salvation in particular. The poetic manifesto is a guide for spiritual life, a post-Christian philosophical and religious mystical work, as well as a manual for post-communist politics. It is concurrently not only a religious, philosophical, and ethical essay, but also a political one. All these aspects intersect and cannot be separated from each other. As I have just indicated, the tradition of the Orthodox Church has affected Kazantzakis in his childhood and further development profoundly. This especially concerns the language of Scripture, the Cretan religious popular culture, the emphasis on asceticism, various liturgical rituals, as well as Byzantine hymnody and iconography. All these are elements which he has reframed and incorporated into his work. Yet when emphasizing the weight that the Orthodox Christian tradition carried for him, I do not imply, in contrast with a couple of modern day Greek Orthodox theologians in Greece itself, that it has been of such overarching importance that it has outstripped the other intellectual movements which have affected him, namely the views of Friedrich Nietzsche, Charles Darwin, Henri Bergson, and Ion Dragomis, as well as the Cretan's perception of Buddhism and communism. Certainly, he was done with a great many elements of the faith and church of his youth, and these he partly replaced by and partly tailored to the principles of the thinkers just mentioned, and this has left clearly visible traces in his work. Now, as for the import of the Orthodox legacy for him, let me give the following example from the monastic patrimony. Kazantzakis was at home with the emphasis on mental vigilance, endurance, remaining intellectually and spiritually awake, as well as the inner struggle for salvation of the soul. That is the fight that every Christian, irrespective of anyone's state of life, has to wage in him or herself. In the ancient sources pertaining to the Desert Fathers and Mothers, the collections of stories about radical ascetical lifestyles, such as the sayings of the Desert Fathers, it is struggle, readiness, abstinence, militant asceticism, the clang of arms, and resistance to the evil powers that play a crucial role. The elders coupled spiritual wakefulness with repeated reminders and admonishments regarding the need of discernment, with the purpose of navigating the divine trajectory and avoiding sloth and disruptive thoughts. These are themes of key significance in the Philokalia as well, a major collection of spiritual treatises edited and published at the end of the 18th century. As an infant, Nikos had been a voracious reader of pious booklets on the lives of the saints, and the themes in point were also dear to the adult Kazantzakis, who continued to study mystical treatises and to frequent monastic citadels. We have, for instance, his diary from his visits to Mount Athos, and in his diary, he notes exactly what he has been reading, and this includes the Philokalia, it includes Maximos, the Confessor, it includes many more. It is true that he filled in a large portion of his asceticism and spiritual march with contents that deviated from traditional or Orthodox monasticism. Even so, he held on to the fundamental monastic categories of the salvation of the soul, vigilance, soberness, nepsis, a key word, self-knowledge, endurance, struggle, and long periods of silence. In his engagement in lifelong combat against sluggishness and spinelessness, and his search for the way how to lead a life which fulfills the high ideals of the readiness to ascend, assuming responsibility, doing one's duty, and the willingness to self-sacrifice, it was the monastic resistance against languor, akidia, atsidia, listlessness, and faint-heartedness that appealed to him intensely. Overall, though, he searched for a new form of religion with a strong philosophical penchant. His realm of thought was a kind, as I noted, a kind of terrestrial and liberal religion, which included a selection of Orthodox constituents that he reframed and fitted into his own philosophy of life. A passionate hunter, he sought out the absolute truth and definitive redemption. And in this quest, he almost permanently dealt with the notion of the divine. His steady and farthest goal was finding God. God, however, was for the Cretan thinker by far not always the Godhead himself, but the steady quest for him, as well as the incessant search for freedom. Even freedom to such an extent as freedom from the liberator. True salvation is actually tantamount to extrication from the Savior, deliverance from any Savior, even being saved from salvation itself. When we read the Odyssey of Kazantzakis, we hear Ulysses crying out several times that he is now totally free, even free from salvation itself. Despaired from the Christian Orthodox deity, the Godhead featuring in asceticism, so again his key manifesto on which I shall now focus, is plainly not a loving, compassionate, almighty, all-knowing, and all-beneficial Father altogether, but also a brute and at times exhausted warrior in urgent need of support, an anonymous and voracious force, present in all and sundry, passible in urgent want of help, and at the same time rising above all and above one and all. Kazantzakis neither hoped for heaven, nor did he fear hell, he said. And we may remember his famous epitaph on his grave in Heraklion. I hope for nothing, I fear nothing, I am free. Δεν ελπίζω τίποτα, δεν φοβούμαι τίποτα, είμαι ελεύθερος. His whole and decisive point was that we only live here and now. Judgment Day takes place in our contemporary actions, and after our disease, we are reunited with the earth. It is clear. The intention of the key manifesto, asceticism, Savior of God, diverges substantially from the traditional Christian approach. But the text also betrays footprints of another essential aspect of Orthodox Christian divinity, namely the dialectics of apophatic and cataphatic theology, envisaging the process of reciprocity. On the one hand, we come in this key manifesto across the apophatic way. God is called the invisible, who transcends everything, including gender categories. And one might also name him abyss, mystery, absolute darkness, absolute light, matter, spirit, ultimate hope, ultimate despair, silence. On the other, we notice the cataphatic approach when the deity is identified as male, the great breath, and full of blood and mud. In addition, God's appellation is not all the same. I quote, "But we called it," namely the highest circle of spiritual and powers, God, "because for primordial reasons, only this name moves our bowels deeply." End quote. Note in all this, Kazantzakis frequently resorts to terms which one can also find in texts of the Greek Church Fathers. When, for example, he names God absolute darkness, absolute light, this is not something new altogether, as one comes across such utterances in patristic apophatic passages as well. And when he calls God the great ecstatic, or megas ecstatikos, he also borrows it from the mystical work about divine names of Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite and other Greek Church Fathers. According to Saint Dionysius, God's yearning or love, eros, Dionysius writes, God's yearning is ecstatic. Moreover, the Areopagite writes in one of his letters that God is both drunk and ecstatic, because God is immense, bubbles over with all good, and is free from anything earthly. Other Eastern Church Fathers, Greeks and Syrians, also attended to the phenomenon of ecstasy and intoxication. Such imagery certainly enticed Kazantzakis. Yet he gave once more his own twist to it, when the Godhead of asceticism calls the I personage my son, and the two of them, God and my son, together get drunk and plunder a large palace. Kazantzakis' Manifesto may represent, besides post-communism, a kind of post-Christianity, as the US-American Kazantzakis expert Peter Bain has called it. The Cretan intended, by all accounts, to leave behind both the Soviet Union's real existing socialism, between brackets, after his initial uncritical enthrallment, and the ecclesiastical status quo. As regards the institutional church, this applies to not solely Orthodoxy, but also Roman Catholicism, Protestantism, Anglicanism, other denominations. Mutatis mutandis, it holds also true for Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and so forth. All these religions might have seemed to the Cretan writer still partially alive and vital, and some of the elements played a conspicuous and key role in both his literary work and his private life. But he saw them in essence as masks that God assumed merely temporarily. These masks were necessary, but constituted, he claimed, only a provisional stage, as God fleetingly donned them with the goal of putting his mark upon the material marshland and printing his face on it, then laying them aside and continuing his course on the path upwards. Let me wind up. Throughout his lifetime, the Cretan writer was looking for an alternative worldview, new 10 commandments, as he proclaims in the Odyssey, for instance, and he also wrote in his diary on Mount Athos. He was aspiring to devise a theology without an almighty theos, and to craft a revised narrative divinity without the conventional concept of an omnipotent deity who exists outside the earth and humankind. In his opinion, as stated, the Godhead as well as the devil and demons exist only within humans. But he also eschewed his theology to be only empirical anthropology. He aimed in this way at a kind of anthropotheology or theoanthropology. And asceticism, saviors of God, is a crucial and decisive step in his mental evolution. Thank you for your attention.
Really fascinating talk. I had no idea that Kazantzakis had written so much and in such an amazing range of areas. Well, we have quite a lot of time for discussion, so take the opportunity. Well, people are thinking, how did he get on Mount Athos? Was there a reaction on the part of at least some of the monks, I imagine?
Yeah, he has been to Mount Athos twice or three times. We don't know exactly because he was kind of sloppy in his notes where he has been and how long and so on. But he has been at least twice. And the first time he was there 40 days, which is actually not true because he was shorter there. But 40 is a nice number, you know. Jesus was 40 years, 40 days in the desert, and Moses 40, and so on. So that sounds well that Kazantzakis was 40 days on Mount Athos, as he liked to think. Well, actually, on the one hand, he was very impressed with Mount Athos, with what I've tried to expound on in my talk, with the accent, with the spiritual accents. But at the same time, he was kind of, how should I say it? He was kind of disgusted at the same time. He did not like what he saw as too much outer ritual. What he did not like was the veneration of relics. He loved icons, but he didn't have anything with relics. He did not want, I mean, if he was going to venerate the left arm of Saint so-and-so, he notes that was nothing for him. He had some excellent meetings, some very spiritual meetings with a number of monks. And he describes that. But at the same time, he remains kind of at a distance. Although, you know, he kept visiting monasteries, and the so-called atheist Kazantzakis, he made his cross. He did everything what normal Orthodox do. And that was not, you know, it's not like Vladimir Putin, who is at the Christ the Savior Cathedral and acts like a normal Orthodox, or tries to act like a normal Orthodox. He really meant it. There was something for him, and sometimes I find that strange too. You know, in Zorba the Greek, if you read what he writes about the monastery, you know, when Zorba and the I person in Zorba, and this monastery is described as a kind of Sodom and Gomorrah, you know, all kinds of where everything happens that God has forbidden. So it is kind of ambivalent, but I would say, and that is really my point, that the hallmarks of monastic spirituality have influenced them deeply, and not only superficially. I mean, he called his own desk his cell and so on, and he had a very monastic rhythm. But it is basically these deep characteristics of monastic life that have influenced him deeply. That's interesting, when he was a young boy, and he had read all these synaxaria, these little biographies, so to say, of saints, he wanted to go to Athos too. So he was only 8 years old. He ran to the harbor of Heraklion, and he went to a boat, and he asked the captain, "Where are you going?" The captain says, what do you want? He said, "Well, I want Phelon Agiaso. I want to be a saint, and I want to go to Mount Athos." And the captain said, "Go home, boy, forget it."
Wonderful.
But in a way, Peter Bean, whom I respect a lot, he lives in New York, and he was professor in New Hampshire at one of the Ivy League schools for comparative literature. He calls this Kazantzakis' wish to become a saint has accompanied him his entire life, but not in the traditional sense of the word, but in his meaning. That's why Peter Bean, when he speaks a couple of times about Kazantzakis' sainthood. I find that very interesting. But then again, in a secular way, because Kazantzakis believes in transcendence, but not as many others do. Transcendence within immanence. That sounds kind of funny, doesn't it? But that is what he basically means. Transcendence within immanence. I mean, you may be critical, of course, of that. I mean, in my own new book about the new Kazantzakis and Greek Orthodoxy, which I hope will appear sometime in Cambridge, I kind of criticize that he does not get beyond for a long time the criticism of religion of Sigmund Freud, Karl Marx, and so many others. And I think that to say that transcendence exists only within immanence is a statement that must be questioned critically. Of course, we have our senses, but does it mean that beyond our senses there is nothing? And I think here some critical theology is really important. And I think that orthodoxy itself can function as a way to criticize him, not to damn and vilify him. We don't need that. It has happened enough. But there are theologians, also good big theologians like Chrysostomos Stamoulis, Panagiotis Ephandis in Thessaloniki, who really evaluate him from that point of view. Although I'll be honest, I'm a bit critical too. I think Ephandis is a bit too critical, and I think Stamoulis is a bit too uncritical. And I think the pupil, the student of Stamoulis, Maria Chatziapostolou, who has written several books, she is a doctor of theology, of Orthodox theology of Thessaloniki, has written several books on Kazantzakis, and she praises him exuberantly. And for her, he is kind of orthodox, and she wants to prove all the time that Kazantzakis basically is an Orthodox in his own way. And I think rightly this has raised the dust, and it needs, but we need more talk, and we need more conversation about these aspects of Kazantzakis. And it's really interesting that we have important bishops, not only, I mean, the Austrian one, and not only the Cretan ones, but also several others who really are up now with this. It has taken a long time. And it's a pity because it cost him the Nobel Prize, of course. I mean, he was the candidate for the Nobel Prize of Literature in the 50s, and he didn't get it. Why not? Because there were tremendous campaigns against him. Even the right-winged Greek government sent people to Stockholm to say, whoever you give the Nobel, we don't care, but not to him, not to him. Yeah, that was a pity for him. Yeah, but then two other Greeks got the Nobel Prize, Seferis and Elitis, and made up for it, so to say. But I think we really need this discussion. And I find it interesting that it's in particular the Orthodox faculty in Thessaloniki who is doing this work. Athens much less, which does not mean necessarily that Athens is much more conservative than Thessaloniki. They have other accents. But I'm not surprised. Well, I'm a bit partial. I studied in Thessaloniki and I did my doctoral work there. But I think it's no coincidence that in Thessaloniki, they're more open-minded for this approach. Sorry, and there may be other questions too. Human life for Kazantzakis is ascent. Ascent, climbing, the struggle for freedom. And it is basically, and this is Kazantzakis, it's not me, it's basically, it is men who are able to climb. Women can try, they get some way or another, they get somewhere, but they can never reach the top because they're not able to. They are not able to unite with the Godhead either. It's only men who can do that, and men only in their best moments. There are many men who are not able, who are cowards, who are whatever, but only men can do it. This is a very difficult issue, of course, not only from contemporary perspective. It was already then. And I deal with it in my new book, of course. On the one hand, we have the Christian tradition, which has not always been, let's put it very friendly, very balanced with respect to women, and this is still a basic issue, of course. Also in my own Roman Catholic Church, we have the Greek society with its traditional gender roles. We have Crete in particular, where patriarchy is so important and partly still is very important. We have Buddhism. I mean, notably, I don't mean Western Buddhism, but I mean Asian Buddhism. In many forms of Asian Buddhism, women are also subordinate to men. It is men who are important, the crown of the of human life. So what I do in my book is also mentioning several examples of women who show the contrary, and who show that Kazantzakis' approach is very one-sided in this respect. And Peter Bean, he says he loves Kazantzakis, but he says this is the only way, the only point where I cannot get along with him. And then again, it's paradoxical because Kazantzakis loved women. I mean, he had good relationships. Many loved him. He had 2 spouses. He had many friends, women friends, who adored him. He adored them too. But at the same time, you know, one of the most important Greek philosophers, Elie Lambridou, who lived at the beginning of the 20th century, and was very close to Nikos. They even had a lovely relationship, twice even. But she criticized very much his Odyssey. And the Odyssey of Kazantzakis is really liable to criticism, which I did too. And there's even some fascism in which the real admirers of Kazantzakis don't want to hear. But there are fascist strands in Ulysses. It's no coincidence that it was written in the 30s. You know, he was also influenced by that. But Lambridou. So she criticized him severely, and he was upset completely. How can a woman understand what I have done in this great epoch, epic? It's impossible. You, Ellie, you're a nice gal, so to say, but you can't. You're unable to reach this level. Which was nonsense, of course, because Elie Lambridou was one of the greatest minds of Greek intellectual history in the 20th century, and you can still visit her living place in Athens. And what she has written is fantastic.
I think we have to keep strictly to time. So just shows how much we appreciate what you've told us about. It, absolutely fascinating. I think we'll all go back and start reading Kazantzakis, and especially we look forward to your book when it comes out. Do you know when it'll be out?
Well, it is planned to be published by James Clark in Cambridge. But they're not sure about the schedule. So I'm waiting. Yeah.
Very good.
Keep working on it. Because thank you for attending. Thank you for your attention.
And next one will be on the 10th of June, and the speaker will be Mary Cunningham on I think it's a 9th century life of the Virgin Mary. So until June the 10th, happy Easter for the Western tradition, and looking forward to a happy Easter for the Eastern tradition. So thank you very much,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye now.
Bye. Thank you, Bert, so much.
You're welcome.
Really enjoyed that.
My pleasure.